So today we start a series on the entirety of human history. Well, we're going very fast. And again, what's important is for you to understand the concepts. And so if there are ideas you don't understand, it's very important that you raise your hand, challenge me, and ask for clarification. So we start off with the dawn of humanity. And this is Charles Darwin. And arguably, he is the most influential thinker of the past 200 years. And the reason why is he wrote a book called The Origin of Species, and he presents to us the theory of evolution. And you all know the theory of evolution because they teach this to you in school, and it's embedded in our everyday lives. And there are three main ideas to the theory of evolution. The first is that it was all accidental. So you have these genetic mutations, and the mutation that is best fitted to survive in the environment would win out. Okay? So it's all a random, accidental process. That's the first thing. Second thing is that it is materialistic, meaning everything that you can see is all that exists. And the third thing is it is emergent, meaning that things build on top of each other. It is a bottom-up process. Now, the theory of evolution marked a turning point in human history because before, European countries were Christian. And Christians believed that there was a divine God who created us. And as such, we were all equal before the eyes of God. Therefore, you cannot go and enslave other people. You cannot go and kill other people. As well, there were three main ideas to Christianity. Okay, the first idea is one, omniscient and omnipresent God. The Spirit, the Holy Spirit, is what infuses life. It's what gives meaning and purpose to life. And the world is a mystery. We have to hold faith. There are things that we cannot understand. God has a plan, but it is a mysterious plan. And so we must be humble and serve the purpose of God. Okay? And the theory of evolution destroys this conception of the universe and introduces a more materialistic one. So why did this happen? Well, it happened for three reasons. The main reason is that we live in the 19th century, when Darwinism came into being. Europeans were engaged in a process of imperialism. They were going around the world and conquering other people and colonizing other people and essentially committing genocide. So they needed a theory to explain why this was happening. And Darwin's theory of survival of the fittest was the most appropriate theory. And the idea is that the world is divided into races, and the white race is superior to everyone else, and therefore the white race has reason, has legitimacy in colonizing other people. And evolution would give rise to racism and eugenics, okay? So before Darwinism, we didn't really have a concept of race because everyone was equal in the eyes of God. And now with the rise of Darwinism, the world is divided according to race. As well, because of evolution theory, people started to believe in eugenics, which is the idea that stupid people who are not white, they should be sterilized. Because if we let them live, all they would do is dilute the genetic pool, okay? And even today, guys, there are still many people who believe in racism and eugenics. The thing about evolution that's very important is that it's a theology, okay? What does that mean? It means that it's a theory of human progress about God. So even though evolution thinks that genetic mutation is an accident, the theology is that, well, the strongest survive. And that's what's right, okay? So might makes right. So in many ways, evolution is a rejection of Christianity. So you would think that Christians would oppose Darwinism and evolutionary theory. But what was surprising is that when the book came out in 1859, only in 20 years, the theory of evolution would come to dominate the entire Western world. It became the dominant idea in schools, in universities, in the sciences. And even today, evolution is a dominant paradigm, meaning that you cannot question evolution. If you question evolution, it means you're crazy. Okay, but I'm crazy, so we're going to question evolution today. All right, so you've studied this in school, but evolution means we came from monkeys, apes, and then there were different species of humans, and eventually the best, our species, the Homo sapiens, won out. Okay? So what evolution says is that we are just a monkey, guys, okay? We're just a monkey. And what do monkeys do? Monkeys like to have sex, monkeys like to eat, monkeys like to fart. That's all we are. We're just monkeys. All right? And this is the evolutionary tree of primates. But there are certain problems with this theory. Okay? The first problem is, if you look at evolutionary theory, what you should have is tremendous diversity as this species develops. But so why is it that we only have one human species? Okay? Why aren't there many different ones? Well, the argument is that there were many different species before, but we won out. Okay? Okay, that's fine. But another problem is, why are we going all around the world? Okay? So all species of human beings like to migrate. But primates don't do that. Why is that humans like to migrate? And so the explanation often is, well, because of climate change, because of war, because humans are chasing game, okay, bisons and food. But then how to explain these people, okay? These are people who went to populate the Pacific Islands, Micronesia. That's kind of weird. First of all, it's really dangerous to go out to the Pacific for months and months, right? Also, like, how do they know that there'll be islands waiting for them in the Pacific? So that's something that's very odd about human beings. In fact, there are lots of things that are really odd about us that other animals don't do. For example, we're very religious, okay? Okay, so the Neanderthals are supposed to be before Homo sapiens, but as you can see, what we've discovered are these religious ritual sites that Neanderthals, where the Neanderthals engage in religious ritual practice. That's kind of weird. What does religion have to do with survival? In fact, you can argue that religion is a waste of time. Why aren't they hunting? Why are they using so much resources and time in building these ritual sites? Okay? Homo sapiens did cave paintings. And these cave paintings, I will show you later on, they're extremely elaborate. As you can see, it's very time-consuming to actually do these paintings. Also, these paintings are in caves, deep inside caves that's very cold, and where there isn't much air. So it's kind of dangerous, actually, to be in these places. But we know that Homo sapiens spent a lot of time in these deep, wet caves drawing these paintings. That's not very utilitarian. Why would we do that? So that's a mystery. Okay? Also, when we drew on caves, we figured out how to make it artistic. So we figured out that red ochre would give us red, yellow pigment on the caves. We also used charcoal to use black. Okay? So we were very creative. We were very resourceful. All right, so we know a lot about the Ice Age because, as you can imagine, during the Ice Age, things freeze over, so they can be easily preserved. And actually, for most of human history, we were in the Ice Age period. Okay, and as you can see, during the Ice Age, the entire world was basically frozen over. So how did we survive? Well, we survived by using the resources around us. Okay, so this is a mammoth. And so they killed a mammoth and they turned the mammoth into a house. Okay? Now the question is, how did they know how to do that? how did they figure it out? And we've been trying for a long time to figure this out. But my answer to you, and this is a theme that I will keep on emphasizing throughout the rest of the semester, is they just knew it. Okay? So let's do a thought experiment. Let's just say that there's 10 of us, and I give you this wall, right? And I say to you, you cannot talk, you cannot communicate with each other. All I want you to do is draw a picture. Now you would think that the picture would be disgustingly ugly. It would be incoherent. But if you actually do this experiment, something weird and wonderful would happen, okay? There's 10 of you, you're not communicating, you don't have a plan, there's no draft, but one of you would draw something, okay? And then the rest of you would see that something, and then you would draw something else, okay? So for example, maybe you draw a sun, then you draw a tree, then that other person draws a mountain, okay? It's almost like telepathy. And that's how we are. If you put humans in a group, they would know instantly how to work together. And they would know how to share ideas together. And so that's the idea I want to present to you. All this stuff is, all this is because of intuition, okay? No one said, hey, there's a mammoth, let's go kill it for food and for housing and for clothing. But if you walk together and you saw a mammoth, all of you together had the same thought. Oh, that could be a source of food and clothing and shelter for us. And you all knew how to work together. That's the beauty of the human imagination and the human empathy. And that's something that back then they practiced a lot, but we've lost because of civilization. Okay? Does that make sense to you guys? All right. And as you can see, back then, humans were just very good at working together. No, you didn't need to have a boss to say, okay, you should go and hunt bisons. You should go and you should make clothes. You should go and you should feed kids. Everyone knew exactly what to do. And you didn't have to communicate. But also what's really interesting about this time period is the diversity of human organization. So what I mean by that is that in different times of the year, in different locations, humans would form different organizations. So most of the time, maybe there'd be groups of like 5 to 10 who would go and get food, okay? But then you have some times of the year when you have these religious festivals where hundreds, possibly thousands got together and you celebrated your God together. It was all intuitive. You didn't have communication, but they all knew at what time, what organization would best fit them. If you didn't like the situation, guess what? You'd go somewhere else and start your own organization. Okay? So early human history, it's a very diverse, very dynamic, very creative period in our lives, even though we've forgotten about it. Okay? And the clearest example of our creativity are these cave paintings that were discovered recently, but which date back 30,000, 40,000 years. Okay? You can see how beautiful these paintings are. Whoever painted these paintings put a lot of care and devotion into them, okay? It's not just kids playing. It's adults who've spent a long time purposefully ensuring that every detail is exact, okay? Then the question then is, how do they do this? Because there's no paper, there's no planning. And again, I present to you the idea, the imagination. They dreamt this. They had a dream, they saw the picture in their heads, and they went and drew this in a cave because they wanted to express themselves. They wanted to leave a legacy. They wanted to leave a memory. There's a calling in you to be creative and to be imaginative. Okay? All right. So, and you can see there's a lot of diversity. This is a story, right? Because you have these horses, but then you have these predators, lions. Okay? So this picture is telling a mythology. It's telling a story of how nature works. Okay, so people are observing nature, and what they see is a cycle of life and death, of destruction and renewal. We're all together. We're all unified. We're all one. It's balance and harmony. And that's why if you were to kill these animals, you also had to commemorate them. Okay, does that make sense? Okay? because this is a world of balance and harmony. If you kill these animals and you eat their food, you must thank them for their sacrifice by commemorating them. It's the same thing as later on, when humans fight in battles, we build monuments to celebrate those who were fallen, right? Because we want to create balance and harmony in the world. We want to commemorate those who made our lives possible. Okay? So in this world, what matters are these animals, because these animals are what gives humans food and clothing. Okay? Okay, you can see how beautiful these pictures are. Like, do you see how lifelike the animals are? Okay, so clearly, we humans had all this creative potential back then. All right. Okay, this is in Spain, in Altamira. This is a bison, and you can see the red ochre, how beautiful it is, okay? Okay. And you can see how it's not meant to be realistic. It's meant to be surreal. It's meant almost to be a mythology. There's a story being told in these pictures. We don't know what the story is, but you can imagine that there's a story of life and death, destruction and renewal. Okay, and you can see the struggle of humanity to get food from nature, but also a willingness to celebrate those who have fallen. And there's religious significance to everything, these cave paintings. How do we know? Because this is clearly a shaman, right? What we call a leopard man. This dates back to 40,000 years in Germany. So we believe that in the early societies, these shamans were the leaders because they had the most wisdom, because they had a connection to the divine. Also, what's really important is that music, okay, this is an instrument, was really important to these civilizations. Now, there's a lot of mystery as to how we first spoke. And as I said, actually, we don't really need to speak because we can all understand each other. So why do we speak? Because we want to sing. Okay, does that make sense? Singing, creating music, was a way to express ourselves in the same way as painting was. And music, once you add words, it becomes storytelling. And that's why we created language. Okay? Not for economic reasons, not in order to create a hierarchy, but for creative reasons, to celebrate our humanity together. And these pictures, as you can see, there are religious elements, okay? So you can see how there are two almost bird figures. And back then, the birds signify Mother Earth, okay? So the bird figure is very important. And you can see almost like the bird figures are leading the animals, herding the animals across. So then ask yourself, why are these paintings appearing in caves? Well, for these people, they all believed that nature was connected, right? And the spirit world and material world were connected together. So the question then is, how does the spirit world connect with the material world? Well, through caves, right? Through portals, rivers, caves, mountaintops. And that's why these places were considered appropriate sites for religious ritual. Okay? And that's why you painted these pictures in caves, because these caves, it's almost like you're summoning the spirit of these animals to return. Right? You've killed these animals. How do you get them to return? By calling for them in these caves. All right? So as you can see, it's a complex but a complete mythology of how the world works. And for them, this was very, very real. Okay? And you can see how these shamans would actually turn themselves into these beasts in order to better communicate with them. Okay, because these beasts, these animals, these bisons, were the basis for all life on Earth. If you didn't have them, then you would die off. So you dressed up like them in order to better communicate with them in the spirit world to draw them back. Okay? Okay, so this is another religious depiction. All right, so these cave paintings, there's always three questions associated with these cave paintings. The first is, how are they painting caves? What are they painting, and where and why are they doing this? Okay, and I've explained to you. There is religious significance to what they're doing. They're trying to complete the cycle of life and death. If you kill an animal, you have to thank the animal. Okay, you do that by making a religious sacrifice. Okay, by making a religious ritual. What are they painting? They're painting the story of life itself, right? They're trying to paint a picture of how life works. A cycle of death and life, destruction and renewal. And everything's connected together. The stars, the caves are portals into the spirit world. And that's why you celebrate them. Okay? And how are they painting the caves? They're painted together and they're using red ochre and charcoal. What's most important is that because these caves actually lack oxygen, when they're painting these paintings, it's almost like they're in a trance state. Okay, does that make sense? Because you don't have enough to breathe. So it's almost like you're on the precipice, the edge of life and death. And it's almost as though you are actually communicating with the spirit world as you're doing this. So it's all divine inspiration, all divine intuition, okay? So what they believe is that when they paint, they're channeling the power of the spirit world. It's not about us using our experience to paint, it's we are channeling actually the divine when we do so. Okay, and the same thing when we sing or when we tell stories. We're not doing this out of our own will. We are only a portal or a mechanism or a channel for the divine to communicate with everyone else. Okay, so does this make sense? Yeah. Okay. All right. The other thing that's really interesting about these cave paintings is we find symbols inside these cave paintings. So this is Genevieve von Pitziger, who is a Canadian archaeologist. And she spent decades going to different caves in Europe, and she cataloged all the different symbols. Okay? So these are not pictures, they're symbols. And as you can see, there's a lot of them. Okay? So why would they have these symbols? And also what's interesting is, if you think about it, this is a writing system. In other words, they have the capacity to write, but they chose not to write. Why? Because if you think about it, in this world, writing is a corruption, right? When you speak, you're channeling the divine. So when you are writing something down, you're actually counterfeiting the divine, okay? Also, remember that for them, talking is really like singing, right? And you cannot capture music in the written form. So it's almost like a corruption of the song, okay? And also, for them, this is really important. Everything is meant to be a communal experience. When you sing, when you talk, when you paint, we do it together. Okay? But when you write, it's a solitary experience. And that's why, even though we humans, from a very, right from the beginning, we have the capacity to write, we chose not to write. Okay, this is really important for us to understand. Writing was a conscious decision. It was not a technology that was invented later on. We just chose not to do it because we thought it was a corruption of the natural world, okay? All right, does that make sense? Okay?